Hey everybody, Joseph Rothschild here, aka MonoBlueTron, back again with another episode of 10-Minute Testing. Now that MasterPeace has officially left the format forever, there are some among us without any idea what to play. Sitting on a big dumb dingus was all that was keeping us going. Thankfully, from the ashes left behind as TD moves on to bigger and better things, rises Elementsabers. So here's the list, and well, there's an immediate issue that any of you Duel Links Toon players will recognize. As always, I'll give you a little bit of background about the archetype, a little bit of a discussion about what I hope the deck can do, and as always, the card by card. So firstly, for those of you that don't know, ElementSaber is a deck that had its moment in the sun. Topping a whopping 1 regional, these monsters all have the ability to change their attribute in the graveyard and search elemental lords, a prospect that should be frightening to anyone who has ever, bothered to read the text on Molin Glacia. Since one of their associated monsters summons itself from hand, it also pairs well with Isolde, with multiple 2-card opens that produce extreme amounts of attack points, as well as assemble Glacia as early as turn 1. This gives it very good and flexible lines on both the play and the draw. Now unfortunately, in order to consistently assemble these combos, the deck needs to find its field spell. Now previously this wasn't particularly difficult. There used to be this card called Ancient Fairy Dragon who would find your field spells for you. And with 9 copies of the card, it was smooth sailing. Now, unfortunately, we live in hell. I cannot stress this enough, the deck literally cannot function without access to the field spell, which not only searches Elementsabers, it allows you to send cards from the deck to the graveyard to trigger their effects, rather than from your hand. It turns out an add to hand stapled onto several foolish burials is pretty mission critical, so we've slapped together this obscenity, which non-ironically uses Trinity format staple and Duel Links consistency booster, Planet Pathfinder, to find it. From there, we can search a mana and sit upon him, or if our hand is more explosive, we can go into Glacia turn 1, or the new Elemental Lord Phosphorage on turn 2. That one's a Regeki. Since losing Lords or using the field spell to search locks us out of our battle phase the next turn, we're going to have to plan carefully and defeat our opponents in one fell swoop, or stack battle skips and pray that our discount MasterPeace can protect us just as well as Daddy did but one format ago. So with that, let's get into the card by card. First, we've got our Elemental Lords, searchable by one of our Sabers, Phosphorage, who needs 5 lights, convenient since mana can't change its typing in graveyard, and Glacia, who needs 5 waters. After that are the Sabers, 3 copies of mana, who can be specialed by sending 2 Elementsabers from your hand to the graveyard, or your deck to the graveyard if you've got the field spell out, that is protected from combat, destruction, or targeting based on what you sent. Maneki is next, who adds an element to hand, followed by Nelu, who recycles an elemental from the graveyard. After that is Ania, who reborns, and the Lesser Sabers. Molehu, who's actually quite good, Book of Moons, Ulia, who negates spells and traps, and Maolo, who foolish burials. Seems redundant. Then we've got 3 Planet Pathfinder, and 1 super agent who is in here because, and I don't know if I've imparted this to you yet, I really need the field spell, and set rotation and super agent occasionally make Isolde in scenarios that I otherwise couldn't. Next is said field spell, Palace of the Elemental Lords, which gives your monsters a 200-point attack buff for every attribute of monster in the graveyard, can add a Elementsaber to hand at the cost of your next battle phase, and allows you to bin creatures from your deck instead of hand to pay the cost of your Elementsaber's effects. After that are our strong one-ofs, following 3 Terraforming, 1 Spiral Resort, 1 Set Rotation, Rota, and Reborn, followed by Called from the Grave, Scapegoats, and Moonmere Shield and Horn for our Isolde targets. In the extra, we've got Topologic, Borreload, Firewall, Trisbania, Decode, Unicorn, Phoenix, Cerberus, Goblin, Mermaid, Isolde, 3 Link Spiders, and a Link Haribo. So with that, let's jump into the games. Our first game is up against Nephthys, and this replay also serves as a combo tutorial for making the turn 1 Glacia. We have opened it, so we'll fire off this copy of Set Rotation to get ourselves a copy of Palace of the Elemental Lords without wasting our normal summon on a Planet Pathfinder. We'll then use Mana's effect to send the Dark and the Fire Elementsaber to graveyard, normal summon the Light, then use Isolde's effect to add another mana to our hand because we have Nalu. Usually you're going to be getting her. We're going to use her second effect for the Wind Elementsaber, then use its effect to add Monoma Glacia to our hand, discarding the Nelu, making everything water in graveyard, and then special summoning it. We're going to rip 2 cards out of our opponent's hand, leaving them severely crippled, and pass it back. Unfortunately, there aren't very many good defensive Link 3 options, but Decode Talker has a lot of attack points. Our opponent's going to go into Ragnarok, end on an Ace of Nephthys and a set card. They'll flip up that Waterfall of Dragon Souls, but I think it's just too little too late. As long as we can OTK them through this, we should be able to win. We're going to Rota and call the Super Agent incorrectly. It's not a big deal. We have a mana in hand, so we can go for that. Normal summon the Super Agent, and they'll concede. Our second match is up against Ancient Gear, and unfortunately this is one of the less exciting hands the deck can produce. While it technically can make a Solda, it would severely hamper our ability to play the remainder of the game to do so. We're going to have to be satisfied with a mana and attack position, which is slightly dangerous against Ancient Gear, a deck that is otherwise quite adept at building men with over 3,000 attack points. We're going to fire off this Pathfinder to get ourselves a copy of Palace of the Elemental Lord, once again send a Dark and a Fire to the graveyard, so that our mana is protected from everything but battle. Our opponent's going to start by normal summoning a Hunting Hound and removing 4 cards from his hand to make Chaos Ancient Gear Giant, getting over our mana for 1,500. But thankfully, since we've made it to our draw phase with a copy of Palace of the Elemental Lords, we should be able to win the game. We'll use the effect of Ania to send a Malehu to graveyard, then use Malehu's effect to set that sucker face down. 3,000 defense points we can deal with. We're going to get ourselves a copy of Super Agent with this copy of Isolde, then go into a second Ania, not once per turn, to get ourselves a mana, which is capable of beating over the Giant and then getting in for big damage. We're going to pass it back to our opponent. They have a fusion in hand and the materials necessary to make Howitzer, but that's really not going to do a whole lot. They'll pass it back to us and we'll BM a little. This is certainly BM and not me just failing to read what Howitzer does. We'll normal summon this Ania, knowing that the game's going to end before we're locked out of our battle phase, getting ourselves another copy of mana and then going to battle phase, beating over the Howitzer, beating over the ultimate pound, and getting in for lethal. Alright, so it's time for game 3, and you know what that means, a best of 3 versus meta. Our opponent is playing True Draco Demise, which is bad news for us because we've opened quite mediocre. Without a mana in our opener, we're going to have to use the effect of Palace of the Elemental Lords. That'll lock us out of our battle phase, but we really don't have time to screw around and sit on a mana for several turns against True Draco. We're going to have to go for an Isolde combo, I think, to keep up with the meta. Unfortunately, doing so prompts the transients from my opponent. We're still going to activate the effect of Isolde because she sends from deck for cost so that we can get these garbage equip spells out of our deck, but that's really not a lot of consolation. They're going to start by normal summoning an Amano Awato, activating Card of Demise, then activating Pot of Duality to find a Terraforming. I love how many cards a turn this deck draws. They'll get a Dragonic Diagram and destroy this copy of Apocalypse alongside my Isolde to get a Disciples of the True Draco Phoenix, which they will tribute for Majesty Maiden. That destroys the last remaining card on my side of the field. They'll draw several more cards with Heritage's effect and tribute summon for Ignis, shuffle 3 cards back with Draco Phoenix, add another Dragonic Diagram to hand, set a copy of Heritage, and pass it back. Things aren't looking great for us. We're going to normal summon Planet Pathfinder, use its effect so that we can get ourselves a copy of the field spell, but unfortunately that triggers Marianime and Ignis and allows him to True Draco Apocalypse tribute the set spell to destroy my spell card. I'll concede after that. So it's time for game 2, and we've opened very interestingly. Called to the Grave doesn't really do anything when my opponent doesn't have any hand traps, and Moonmere Shield is a straight-up Garnet. Regardless, we have opened the Glacia combo, so I don't think I can be too upset. Plus, my opponent has opened a couple of cards like Rivalry of Warlords that do nothing. We're going to start by activating this copy of Palace, locking ourselves out of the battle phase to get a copy of mana to our hand, sending a couple guys to graveyard, then activating Reinforcement of the Army for Mohelu, equipping a Moonmere Shield onto the mana so that it goes back to our deck when mana goes to the graveyard, and then using Isolde's effect for a Nehlu. Now, it's important to get the water one because, of course, you won't be able to use her effect this turn. We'll activate the effect of Mankini to get a Glacia to our hand, go into Decode Talker, and, well, basically just call water up a whole bunch of times. Exciting. We'll then use the effect of Glacia to send 2 cards to the graveyard and pass it back. Our opponent draws into a third Terraforming. They're going to go ahead and destroy one of them to get themselves a copy of Apocalypse, and the second for another Diagram, destroying this useless copy of Rivalry and tributing over the Apocalypse for an Ignis. Thankfully, it can't get over our enormous Monon Glacia, and while we don't have a battle phase, we do look like we're in pretty good shape. Our opponent's going to activate the effect of Dragonic Diagram. We're going to chain set rotation, and as long as we keep our field spells set, we can easily keep them off of Dragonic Diagram for the remainder of the game. Now, what I don't know is they don't have it, but let's pretend that I outplayed my opponent. We're going to set this Scapegoat and pass it back to my opponent. They draw into another copy of Ignis, which they elect not to play. We flip Scapegoat at end step, and here we go. This is what Scapegoat was meant for. Not Link Summoning, not metamorphosing into Thousand Eyes Restrict, switching to attack mode and using the boost to get in for lethal damage! Alright, so it's time for game 3, and oh my god, is that 2 called again? Our opponent's going first. Let's see just how far they can go. They have a lot of monsters in that opener. They're going to normal summon the Amano Awato, use the tribute summon effect of Disciples of the True Draco Phoenix, and here's a Card of Demise for 2, followed by a Terraforming, a Dragonic Diagram, a Heritage, and brick. Oh, there's a Desires. And there's a bunch of traps. Okay, well, they tribute summon for a Dynamite Knight, which effectively sets 5 and passes on us. Potentially we can play through it. We'll activate the effect of Palace of the Elemental Lords, locking ourselves out of our next battle phase to get a mana to our hand. We'll then send a couple of Dorks to graveyard, normal summon a Nehlu. They will flip an Apocalypse, targeting an Apocalypse to prevent us from going into a Solda. But guess what? That protection effect applies to all of my Elementsabers, so they're forced to send their own Dynamite Knight. Maybe we can go for lethal here. We have the setup. 3,200, 2,400. We're 700 points off. We don't have a particularly robust extra deck, so I don't know where that extra damage is going to come from. They're going to use Dragonic Diagram and True Draco Apocalypse to start chewing through our monsters. They'll shuffle 3 cards back in. I'm going to flip up some Called to the Graves because I don't want them ever getting monsters again. I think that's the only way we win this game. Unfortunately, I think they have maybe 1 Ignis left, and this Heritage and Card of Demise find the terraforming necessary to get it. They're going to Dragonic Diagram, destroying their Heritage so they can get a Ignis Heat alongside the Disciples Tribute Summon. So our entire board has been wiped, save for our field spell, which can at the very least still activate its effect, but of course doing so will trigger Ignis's effect. We're going to beat them to the punch by calling a bunch of water and going into the one, the only Monon Glacia off the top of our deck, and there's Monarchs Erupt. Okay, so I don't think we can beat this. Maybe we can beat over one of the random Ignises and get in for lethal that way. They put another one back into their deck and then immediately get it with a Dragonic Diagram, as well as a True Draco Apocalypse. Things aren't looking great. We're going to take a whole bunch of damage here, and it would have to be a fantastic Destiny draw off the top of our deck to win this game, and Nehlu is not it. We're going to normal summon Mankini, whose effect is of course negated, to send a copy of Mana to Graveyard for cost. Afterwards, we're going to use the effect of Lapia Lana and allow our opponent to beat in our face for a lethal amount of damage. So we're back with the deck, and I like it. Well, it's hard to give rogue decks an honest interpretation of their playability in a format where the difference between rogue and meta is kind of night and day. Despite a lot of decks being playable, the ones that aren't really aren't. If you feel comfortable playing around a field spell, do or die, in a format full of hand traps, try this deck out. If not, I can't say I don't blame you, but I'm warning you, you're missing out on Mana's sweet MasterPeace cosplay. Resolving either of the Elemental Lords feels great, and I would recommend this strategy to anyone looking to OTK in the year of our Lord 2017 +1. So that's that. Let's all pour one out for the localization team, changing the name of ElementSaber Willard. If you want to see me play the decks I make on this show on stream, I'm on twitch.tv/monobluetron every Tuesday and Thursday from 10 to midnight Eastern Standard Time, and if you have an idea for a certain deck or archetype you want me to take a look at on a future episode of this show, let me know in the comments and I'll do my best. Otherwise, I'll see you Monday.